how can someone become a leader and how leadership skill can give you a promotion and advance your career. Bat Chumrip Su and hi, my name is Kosal. Welcome to Grow Leader Podcast, a weekly podcast that created to inspire and equip you to maximize your potential and grow your influence. And if this content is helpful to you, please give us a comment below and share in your social media. And also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you will not miss any of our future episodes. And today's guest is the right person to discuss about this topic. She's the Deputy Director of LSI Business School. She has lived and worked in Cambodia for more than 17 years as an academic and business consultant and also a small business owner. She received her master's degree in management and doctoral degree in organizational and leadership from the University of San Francisco. She has supervised several PhD students in Cambodia as well. To me, she is also my professor when I studied my master's degree at Phan University. I joined her class, a couple of classes, and not only that, she is my mentor. We got to meet on personal level. I got to have coffee with her and also lunch with her as well. She added a lot of value to me as well. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Susan Hagadorn to Grow Leader Podcast. And welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Chumrip So.
Bat Chumrip Su. Thank you so much for making your time to join with us in Grow Leader Podcast.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So you have lived and worked in Cambodia for 17 years.
Yes.
Wow, it's been a while.
It has.
And how was your life here?
Well, I must like it because I've stayed this long. The first time that I came to Cambodia was 22 years ago in the year 2000. And I was on a study tour of several countries in Southeast Asia, but Cambodia really somehow got into my heart. And I think it was a combination of how resilient the people were at that time. It was still just coming out of the Civil War period.
Yes.
There were a lot of homeless children, but they still were happy. Mm-hmm. And I kept finding reasons to come back through my work, through my education. And it finally dawned on me that there's a lot that I could learn from Cambodia. And at the same time that I've been lucky enough to have many people who had taught me over the years. And so there could be sort of a fair exchange if I were to come here for a while. So I decided to come here and stay as long as it continued to be interesting and as long as I felt like I was giving something back. And before I knew it, 17 years had gone by.
Wow, it's 17 years.
And I'm still learning every day.
So when you first started in your career here, 17 years ago, what did you do?
Well, I had done a lot of work with NGOs in the United States, and at the time, a lot of NGOs here were looking for consultants in organizational development and leadership. And in particular, this was when the HIV/AIDS crisis was fairly severe here.
Yeah.
Luckily, I was able to work myself out of a job because Cambodia is really good with epidemics, and they were able to keep it at a low level. So I spent several years where I was primarily working as a consultant with a variety of different NGOs. At one point, on an impulse, I purchased a restaurant in Siem Reap and used it as a training program for disadvantaged youth. And that was a great experience, but by the time 10 years had gone past, I was teaching full-time, and it was hard to divide up my life in that way, so I decided to actually sell the restaurant to one of the young men who had started off working with us. and became a full-time academic. And then 2 years ago, I came here to LC Business School, and currently I'm the Dean of the Leadership Academy, as well as the Dean of International Relations Office.
Yes. Yeah. And today's topic for our podcast is developing leadership skill for career advancement. And you have your master degree in management and also a doctoral degree in organization and leadership. Leadership has been into the attention and a lot of focus in the last maybe 50 or 60 years. However, leadership has not been clearly defined because there's a lot of scholar or expert in leadership, but it's kind of, I don't know, it's hard to make it as the clear definition like other subjects. First of all, Dr. John C. Maxwell, he is a respected and well-known leadership expert, has written almost 100 books on leadership. And he said leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And I'm sure you know about Peter Northouse. He defined leadership as a process whereby an individual influence a group of individuals to achieve common goal. And how about you, as a leadership expert, one of the leadership experts, what is your own definition of leadership?
I think there are a few pieces of leadership, and my definition would be very similar to Maxwell's and Nordhaus's, in that I think, first of all, there needs to be a vision of making some kind of positive change in the world. And then there is a team of people who walk together towards that goal, hopefully in a spirit of service.
Yeah. When we talk about leadership and influence, it can be used interchangeably. And sometimes we can influence people in the negative way and also in the positive way as well. And first of all, we talk about a guy who killed almost 3 million people in Cambodia, Mr. Pol Pot, and also other world leader, Hitler, and some other people who call us, quote unquote, as a leader. He has a lot of power and influence as well. And so you think these people are called leaders as well?
I'm so glad you asked me that, because whenever I teach a leadership class, the first class I ask the students to think about someone that they think is a great leader. And there's always someone in the class who mentions Pol Pot or Hitler. And the reason behind that is that they feel that they were able to get a lot of people to do what they wanted them to do. And that's why there are two parts in my definition of leadership, that it needs to be towards a positive change. I reject the idea that people who influence people towards bad deeds can be considered leaders. And the other piece of it is that I'm a strong believer in the importance of service. And so I think it needs to be people working together in a spirit of service.
Okay. So in the spirit of making the positive change in a society.
Yes.
Yeah. And so can we talk about you personally a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. In your life, who is the leader? Who are maybe one or two person or several? Who are the leaders in your life that make great impact or influence you the most?
First of all, in terms of my personal life, I've been lucky to have 3 great mentors. And they were people who were very willing to share their knowledge, share their perspectives, share the wisdom that they have about how to get things done. And so I would consider them to be several great influences. And just to call them out by name in case they should see this podcast, I'm thinking about Bob Miller, Joe Hafey, and Jim Williams, who were all supervisors of mine. And in a spiritual sense, I was raised in a Christian family, and so there's the influence of the teachings of Jesus in terms of the kind of leader that he was and the kinds of service that he did to others for positive change. In Cambodia, I was lucky to become acquainted with the work of Mahagosananda, who is probably one of the greatest Buddhist leaders to have been in Cambodia. He's sometimes known as the Gandhi of Cambodia. And unfortunately, not a lot of young people know about him, but he left behind, he passed away some years ago, and he left behind a wonderful book called Step by Step. And one of my favorite readings from it, he talks about how in order to be a good public leader, first you need to be able to learn to lead yourself and to have mindfulness and equanimity. Yeah. And he also exemplified a spirit of service to the people that he led, and a spirit of service to the community. And one other thing I want to say about this concept of service is that I truly believe that when a certain belief keeps coming up in different, both religious and non-religious contexts, that we're probably starting to get close to something that's a universal truth. And so in Christianity, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Islam, in every major religion, and in many secular areas, the concept of service is always right at the middle.
Okay. So you mean leaders must have compassion,
Yes.
or love or care to give the service to other people? Is that
I think so.
okay? So it's mean like there's a theory of seven leadership, and I'm sure that maybe you thought about that subject, right? Mm-hmm. And can you embrace a little bit about seven leadership?
I'd rather talk about emotional intelligence.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. I think another big influence for me, and it follows this whole idea of becoming a good personal leader before becoming a public leader, is the concept of emotional intelligence, which was not created by Daniel Goleman, but he was the person who made it very popular. Yeah. And he worked very closely with the Dalai Lama. So I find it interesting in the Cambodian context that when you look at these four quadrants of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, awareness of the emotional needs of others, and then relationship management, it almost is an overlay with the four sublime abodes, where you look at mindfulness, equanimity, compassion, and sympathetic joy.
Yeah.
So a great deal of similarity there. So emotional intelligence, I think, is probably one of the most important sets of skills that anyone, as a leader or as a non-leader, I think it's very, very important, because our brains can get us into a particular job, but it's usually our ability to act in an emotionally intelligent manner that is going to make us a really valuable member of whatever community we're in.
When we talk about leadership, there's a lot of myth or misconception about leadership. First of all, some people can have a myth or misconception like leaders are born, not made, and people believe that those people believe that maybe someone born to be a leader, he or she will become a leader, and if you are not born a leader, you will not become a leader. You will be just a follower. And what are the other misconceptions or myths about leadership that you find?
The one that you just mentioned would probably be one of the first to come to mind.
Yeah.
And what they find is that there are some traits that people can be born with that can make it easier for them to be a leader. but that's maybe 30%, and the other 70% is the way the person can be nurtured and given challenges and feedback and support to grow. And there would not be a billion-dollar industry in leadership writings and courses and training these days if it weren't for the fact that leaders can be made.
Yeah.
So that would certainly be a first. A second one would be the idea that leadership is about control, because that's where you can get into this dark side of leadership where we look at people like Pol Pot or Hitler as being good leaders simply because they can control people. But I think a third and more subtle one is the idea that one style of leadership fits every situation. And when we look at people's behavior, we usually find that a behavior that is excellent in one situation is actually very negative in another. And so there's a theory of leadership, which I think is one of the most important ones that have been developed, called situational leadership. And it says that the leader needs to really be attuned, and here the emotional intelligence comes in, to how ready another person is to take responsibility and how willing they are to take responsibility. And that for each of those combinations, there's a different leadership style. So someone who is very high in the ability to take responsibility and the willingness to take it, you can pretty much just delegate to them and not have to worry too much. But you might have other people who lack the willingness and lack the readiness, who may need to be supervised very closely. So I think that's one of the most important lessons, because I think that idea of leading people differently depending on the situation is something that can overlay just about every other leadership theory.
Okay. And when you talk about leading people in different situations or different contexts, you know, there are different style, ways of leading people, and also culture can influence our leadership. And as a Western, you grew up in America and you were lead in American way or Western way. And now you come to Cambodia, to Asia, and maybe you find the similarity or differences in the leadership in the Western world and also in the Eastern world or Asia. So what are the comments or the difference that you find in the leadership styles in Western and in Eastern?
Well, my ideas about cultural differences have evolved a lot over the past 20 years because we've become very globalized.
Yeah.
And I think there is far more difference within cultures than there is between cultures today, because there is so much interaction. So I think you're going to see similar styles of leadership existing in the West that we see in the Eastern countries and vice versa. So I will say a little bit about differences, but it's a gross generalization. It certainly doesn't apply to everyone. I think in general, Cambodians are a bit more oriented towards relationships, and Westerners are a bit more oriented towards task. Not always the case, but I think there's a tendency that way. I think Cambodia is still a bit more hierarchical. When I was doing consulting work with usually NGO leaders, I met some who had been exposed to Western leadership practices and very much wanted to apply them in their organizations. And that meant delegating more authority to people, delegating more decision making. And oftentimes their staff were very, very uncomfortable with that because they were afraid of being wrong or being punished. So I think there's still a little bit of that here, but not as much as there used to be.
Yeah. So now now as the leadership evolve in even in the Western or in the Eastern, like we learn from each other. We learn from what is good practice in the Eastern and West communication and teamwork, adding to those skills so that they can be successful. How leadership can support or can help someone if they want to advance in their career, to become like getting promotion or becoming or like they grow from one position to another position.
Okay.
Yeah.
I go back to the definition of leadership. So I think that someone who has a vision for positive change within their organization, they're likely to draw attention as long as they stay humble.
Yes.
Because people who have great vision but who are not humble can be offensive to other people. And then if they know how to work with teams, as you said, and communication is a huge amount of that, if they are good at problem solving, if they're good at bringing groups of people together to work on solutions, and if they do that with the idea of serving their community, if it's an NGO, with serving the customer, if it's a for-profit business, I think those are things that will help a person to get the kind of attention that will lead them into higher level positions.
Okay. So you mean leadership is not only about just skills and also the character as well. And you mentioned about humbleness. What are the other characters that can help or build someone to become a better leader? Like one you mentioned about humility.
Right.
And are there any other characters that someone need to develop?
There can be so many.
Yeah.
I think someone who has a generous attitude towards others, that doesn't mean that they're doling out money, but they're generous with their time, with their knowledge, they're willing to share. That's very important. Self-discipline is very important. I think as people get into leadership positions, there are a lot of things that can create stress. So learning ways to renew the self, whether it's meditation, which can be practiced for 5 minutes if we're feeling stressed out, or simply making sure that we take some time to get into nature, or whatever it is that helps us to feel calm and to renew. I think that's very important.
Yeah. Okay. So how about if someone said, I want the specific skills that I can develop my leadership skill. So what are those set of skills that, if I had those skills, I can grow my leadership ability?
Well, with leadership, we're talking about working with teams.
Okay.
Because a leader without followers isn't leading anyone.
Okay.
So communication is very important, and I think the most important part of communication is to have good active listening skills. We spend a lot of our time, instead of really listening deeply to people, we're thinking about what we want to say when they're finished. So I think learning how to listen deeply is very important. Facilitation skills in terms of being able to help people have constructive conversations, particularly where there's a conflict involved, is very important. Delegation skills are important because the leader can't be doing everything. Time management,
Yes.
prioritizing, analysis skills are very important. So being able to analyze who the stakeholders in an organization are and what their needs are, needs analysis.
Yes, yeah.
Those are just some off the top of my head. There are many skills.
Yes, that's a lot of skill. You mentioned about emotional intelligence earlier, and I remember this when I read the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, and he said EQ or emotional intelligence, when you work higher in the higher level, the needs for emotional intelligence is twice needs as much as the IQ. Or is you think what do you think about that?
I think that's probably true because today it used to be that most organizations expected the leader to be the smartest person in the room. But we're now working in a very technologically advanced kind of environment. And the person who's going to lead a team doesn't necessarily need to be the person who knows the most about the technology. If it's a hospital, they don't need to know how to go in and do surgery.
Yeah.
But they do need a lot of the skills that would be involved in helping to bring a team together and then move them along in the same direction. And so I think that you're talking about emotional intelligence then. It's not even uncommon today that the leader of an organization may be paid less than the experts that they need to run things for them.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think emotional intelligence is very important in leadership as well. Because when you're leading a group of people, and you need to understand or show empathy to them, versus the leader who are very controlling and don't show empathy or understanding about the feeling of other, and can crush the team. Can maybe their followers are following them, but not from the heart, not willingly, or sometimes maybe because of the incentive or because of salary or because of others. But when a person showing empathy, understanding, listening, and help other people grow, and those leaders can become more influential or better leader. And
I think in the long run they're going to be better off because a lot of people try to lead by fear, and I don't know if that can really be called leadership. It could just be people doing as you say because they're afraid of you.
yeah,
But I think that the leader who is able to show that they care about the people that they are working with and are able to take care of their needs to a certain extent, they're going to have a much longer shelf life than the people who are simply feared.
yeah, yes. I read an article about like the top skills that need in the 21st century, and leadership skill is one of the top skill. When someone want to grow or to advance in their career, and they said leadership is one of the skills that you should develop. But some people still think, oh, it's not for them. I just want to, if I want to be successful, I must just develop my technical skill or the skill like you study in university or in your in a technical school. But how do you think that how do you say to those person who said, oh, if I want to be successful in my career, leadership is not something in my list?
I think that one of the things that we could think about is the idea of self-leadership.
Yeah.
Because not everybody is going to be a public leader. If you have 50 people in an organization, for example, you can't have 50 leaders. But you can have 50 people who all have the same types of soft skills that a leader would have. And certainly being able to do self-leadership is a very important one. You probably remember from reading Emotional Intelligence that early on Daniel Goleman tells a story about a brilliant student at a top university whose dream it was to go to medical school. And in order to go to a top medical school, in order to get into a top medical school, he needed to have a very high GPA. So he wanted to get all A's. And one of his professors gave him a C. And he went to see the professor, but in the process of talking with him about why he got a C, he became so enraged that he stabbed the professor. The professor survived, but this brilliant student had had a huge lapse in terms of self-leadership. And as a result, he went to jail, never went to medical school, was never able to attain any of his dreams.
So you mean leadership must first start with leading self, right?
Absolutely. If you can't lead yourself, you can't lead anyone else.
Sure, yes. So first of all, you need to be able to lead yourself well so that you can lead other people.
Right.
And especially if you want to advance in your career, first lead yourself, and then when you got positions of leading other people, you got the opportunity to lead a group of people like 5 or 6 people, and maybe you can grow to become a CEO or the president of the company who oversee hundreds of thousands of people. But it first must start with leading self.
Absolutely. And if there is one great truth that I believe about leadership, that would be it, is that we have to lead ourselves before we can lead others.
Yeah. So what is your final comments or recommendation to the fresh graduate or young professional that wants to advance in their career?
The first would be to have many teachers and to look for wisdom anywhere you can find it, because it's available all over the place if we look for it. Given the way that the job market has changed, every fresh graduate today is going to have many different careers.
Yeah.
And a piece of advice someone once gave to me that turned out to be very good advice was, don't become too specialized. And this person saw in my case there are a lot of things that I find interesting. So he was basically saying, don't lock yourself into any one thing. And I think today that people are going to need to develop skills that are going to allow them to be flexible, because all of us are going to need to be continuous learners throughout life. You don't want to have to go back to school every time that you have a change of careers. And it's guaranteed that everyone graduating today is at some point going to be holding jobs that we can't even imagine right now. And I think the final bit of advice that I would give is that you're going to learn a lot over the years, and at some point it's really important that you start to give back, because it's going to bring a great deal of joy into your life, and it's also how you're going to be able to grow new leaders.
Yes. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining the podcast today. As always, you always have good ideas and adding a lot of values to me personally, and I hope that this conversation will help our audience to learn about developing leadership skill and also become like a better leader, especially leading ourselves. And if you like this content or these conversations, please give us a comment of what you like about this conversation, and you can share on social media. And also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you will not miss any of the future episodes. So thank you for listening and watching to our podcast today, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.